In the winter of 1873, Dodge City wasn't a town. It was a fever. Buffalo hides stacked like currency. Saloon floors slick with whiskey and blood. No laws, no mercy. Just men with cold eyes and hot tempers. And into that storm rode Bat Masterson, young, untested, and not yet the man history would remember. But what he saw, what he survived, would leave scars deeper than any bullet. A thief met at gunpoint on a train platform. A skull cracked open by warriors on a lonely stretch of prairie. And a siege, one of the most desperate in frontier history, where 29 people faced hundreds and lived to tell of it. This isn't just a tale of gunfights and glory. It's the crucible where legend began to take shape. Welcome to Chronicles of the Old West, Steel and Silk, the life of Bat Masterson. This is Episode 2, Blood in the Snow, Fire in the Dust.
The railroad brought the town to life, but the buffalo made it boom. Dodge City had risen from the dust like a fever dream, mushrooming almost overnight with the arrival of the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe Railroad. By the winter of 1872 to 73, nearly 1,000 buffalo hunters and the merchants who outfitted them choked its narrow, muddy streets. The town thrummed with commerce by day and with danger by night. Bat Masterson arrived in this chaos as just one more plainsman chasing work and maybe a bit of glory. But Dodge had a way of exposing a man, of shaping or breaking him, and the Bat who came to town that winter was still rough clay. The general store run by seasoned plainsmen, Bob Wright and Charlie Rath, was the daytime heart of the town. Their shop doubled as a bank for the hide hunters, whose wagons often formed a blockade in the streets, stuffed with the bloody fruits of their labor, buffalo hides bound for the markets back east. Wright later wrote, "There was no time when one could get through the place on account of the blocking of the street by hundreds of wagons. Dozens and dozens of camps all around the town in every direction. It was the closest thing to order Dodge had. And that order was measured in freight receipts and stacks of buffalo pelts. But when the sun fell, Dodge became something else entirely. By night, the town belonged to the gamblers, the drunks, and the dancers. The Alhambra Saloon, run by James Dog Kelly, an Irish immigrant turned Confederate soldier, turned showman, and Tom Sherman's dance hall became temples of excess. Hardened buffalo men with calloused hands and thousand-yard stares poured their wages into poker pots and the open arms of painted ladies. And over it all loomed a tension you could feel in your teeth. The town had no sheriff, no laws to speak of, and no patience for weakness. For the moment, law came in the form of Bill Bully Brooks, a former stage driver turned gun-slinging marshal. Hired by the saloon keepers to keep the bloodshed from becoming too inconvenient for business, Brooks rode the streets with a pair of long-barreled six-shooters and a growing list of enemies. In his first month, it's said Brooks shot or wounded 15 men. 4 of them fell in one bloody blur, as witnessed by plainsman Emmanuel Dubbs. And if that number sounds exaggerated, well, it might be. But in Dodge City, exaggeration often told a deeper truth, that death walked close and fast, and justice came from the barrel of a Colt. Brooks's time was short. On March 4th, 1873, tough buffalo hunter Kirk Jordan took up a needle gun and tried to put an end to the marshal. He waited by a doorframe on Front Street, steadied his aim, and fired. The ball punched through 2 water barrels and lodged in an iron hoop, inches from Brooks's crouching body. The marshal ran. He survived, but he was finished. The next day, he shook hands with Jordan and left Dodge. A little over a year later, vigilantes in Sumner County hanged him as a horse thief. Bat watched all this from the shadows, not yet a lawman, not yet a legend, just another hunter with an eye for trouble and a taste for justice. That spring, violence was as regular as sunrise. Henry Raymond, a close friend of the Masterson brothers, recorded much of it in his diary. He and Bat were in town the day Jordan fired on Brooks. The same day, a soldier was beaten and robbed of $5. That night, no one even raised an eyebrow. The town was drowning in its own chaos. A so-called vigilance committee formed to restore order, but as is often the case with mobs, power fell to the worst of them. Soon, the vigilantes were no better than the men they claimed to police. When a buffalo hunter named McGill was gunned down for firing a pistol in a dance hall, few mourned, but many were unsettled. Then came the night Tom Sherman, the very man who owned the dance hall, chased a man named Burns into the street and shot him dead. As Burns lay twitching on the ground, Sherman stood over him and asked the crowd, "I'd better shoot him again, hadn't I, boys?" Then he did. The second bullet tore through Burns' skull. In Dodge City, even murder asked for applause, but the town would soon learn there was a line, and crossing it would awaken something far more powerful than vigilante justice. In June, that line was crossed. William Taylor, a quiet black man who ran a small restaurant, was murdered by 2 members of the Vigilance Committee, John Scott and William Hicks. They expected nothing to come of it. After all, Dodge had no real government and no law to stop them. But Taylor had once cooked for Major Richard Dodge at the nearby fort, and when Major Dodge heard what happened, he sent a wire to the governor of Kansas. "A most foul and cold-blooded murder committed last night by ruffians in Dodge City. Had nobody with power to act. Please authorize the arrest of the murderers." Governor Thomas Osborne responded with speed and clarity. Dodge could act, and it must. The next morning, the sound of cavalry boots echoed through the streets. Soldiers surrounded the town. Hicks was arrested. Scott escaped, hiding in the icebox at Peacock's Saloon and vanishing into legend. He'd remain a wanted man even years later when Bat Masterson wore the badge. That same day, a special election was held. Charles E. Bassett was elected sheriff of Ford County, and with that vote, Dodge City began the slow, bloody crawl from outlaw camp to frontier town. Bat was not yet sheriff, but he was watching and learning. Through that violent spring and summer, Bat moved between the buffalo camps and the city. He hunted with the likes of Jim White and Tom Nixon, danced with Tom Sherman's girls, and watched his brother Ed take a job at the Alhambra. Life was a swirl of risk and rugged routine. But everything changed on April 15th. A man named Raymond Ritter had skipped town the summer before, slipping away under the cover of night and the illusion of forgetfulness. He was a contractor, slick and silver-tongued, who had promised Bat Masterson and his crew a fair wage for grueling grading work near Grenada, Colorado, grinding labor under a punishing sun. When the job was done, Ritter was gone, along with the promised $300. No goodbyes, no payment, just dust in the wind and a lesson in trust. For months, the name Ritter hung around campfires like a bitter aftertaste. Most men would have let it go, chalked it up to life on the plains, where justice was as thin as paper and just as easy to tear. But not Bat. The debt lingered with him like a splinter under the skin. Then, one day in April 1873, word came in. Ritter had been seen at the end of the line, flush with money, $2,000, maybe $3,000 stuffed in a valise. He was headed back east and would be rolling into Dodge on the next train. Bat said nothing at first, just listened. Then he stood, adjusted the brim of his hat, and made for the depot. By the time he arrived, a crowd had begun to gather. Buffalo hunters, gamblers, saloon keepers, curious townsfolk who sensed something was about to happen. Men leaned against posts. Women peered from behind curtains. The sun beat down, and the steel rails hummed faintly in the distance. Then the train came. A black engine coughing steam like a dragon in chains. It hissed to a stop, and Bat stepped forward alone. He boarded without a word. A long, tense minute passed, then 2. Onlookers shifted on their heels, murmuring. A woman gasped as the train door swung open, and Bat reappeared, pistol drawn, jaw tight, eyes cold as a January river. Beside him, trembling and pale, was Raymond Ritter. Bat pressed the barrel of his Colt against Ritter's side and guided him out onto the rear platform of the car. He didn't raise his voice. Didn't need to. Every man in that crowd could hear the words as if they'd been carved into stone. "You owe me $300. Pay it now, or you don't leave this train alive." Ritter stammered, called it robbery, claimed injustice. But one look into Bat's eyes, those ice-blue orbs that seemed to see straight through a man, and Ritter wilted like grass under a boot heel. He mumbled something about the money being in his valise back in the car. Bat never turned his head. He simply motioned to his friend, Henry Raymond, who was watching from the edge of the crowd. Raymond boarded, retrieved the bag, and brought it back. With shaking fingers, Ritter undid the clasp and peeled back the leather. Inside was a thick roll of banknotes, months of labor, gambling winnings. Who knew? Bat never blinked. Count it out. And Ritter did. 3 crisp, begrudging $100 bills laid flat in Bat's hand like an offering. Only then did Bat lower the pistol and step aside. Ritter, humiliated and hollow-eyed, slinked back into the car, the door slamming behind him like the bars of a cell. The crowd burst into cheers. Hats flew into the air, shoulders were clapped, drinks promised. In a town ruled by braggarts and bullies, Bat Masterson had done something rare. He made a point without a single wasted word. Justice hadn't come with fanfare or blood, but with presence. Quiet, sharp-edged presence. From that day forward, he wasn't just another young hunter. He was Bat, a man with a steady gun hand, an iron will, and a code that didn't bend for fear of favor. Dodge City had just met one of its future lawmen. And Ritter, he paid his debt. He also bought every passenger on that train a story they'd tell for years to come. With spring came the call of the hunt once more. In May, Bat headed south with George Mitchell to chase what remained of the buffalo herds. The Kansas plains had been picked nearly clean. The hunters now turned their sights to the Texas Panhandle, a forbidden land protected by treaty and claimed by the Comanche, Cheyenne, and Kiowa. It was in this dangerous country that Bat learned what survival really meant. It was deep into winter, 1873, the wind biting and unkind, the land hard and white under a crust of snow. Bat Masterson had gone out alone that morning, scouting for fresh kills. The herd had moved southeast and sign was scarce, but Bat was patient. He had tracked buffalo before across colder trails and under darker skies. By mid-morning, he found one, a lone bull trailing behind the herd. A clean shot from his Sharps rifle dropped the beast. The heavy thump of its fall echoed across the prairie. Bat dismounted, tied his reins to a bush, and knelt beside the carcass to begin skinning. His rifle lay a few feet away in the snow. It was a mistake. The wind shifted. A shadow moved at the edge of his vision, and then 5 Cheyenne warriors appeared like ghosts from the sage, moving with the stealth of hunting cats. Their faces were painted for war. Their ponies snorted behind them, eyes wild, breath rising in the cold like steam from a boiling pot. Bat reached for his weapon, but it was too late. One of the warriors lunged and seized the sharps. Another came in fast behind him and, with grim precision, swung the octagonal barrel like a club, catching Bat across the side of the skull. The world went sideways. Blood spilled across his cheek and into his collar. The snow beneath him turned pink. Bat staggered, senses ringing, knees buckling. He blinked and saw a blur of motion, his revolver now in another warrior's hands. His own weapons, his own blood. 5 warriors, stone-faced and ready, the muzzles of his stolen guns pointed directly at him. They didn't speak his language, but their meaning was clear. Get out. Now. Bat looked from face to face. No rage, no mockery. Just a grim, silent warning. He was outnumbered, unarmed, alone. With his head pounding and blood dripping into his eye, Bat made the only choice left to him. He ran. Snow crunched beneath his boots as he sprinted across the open prairie, his breath ragged, heart thundering. He didn't stop until he reached camp, nearly half a mile away, where his partners were warming by the fire. When he stumbled into the clearing, they looked up in shock. "Jesus, Bat, what happened to you?" He told them. The other hunters, wide-eyed and wary, wanted no part of a fight with Bear Shield's Cheyenne band. "It ain't worth it," one said. "Not for one rifle, not for a hide. We push back, and we bring the whole damn tribe down on us." Bat said nothing at first, wiping the blood from his face. Then he stood slowly, fists clenched. "They stole my rifle, my revolver, my kill, and they busted my head open with it." Jim Harvey looked at him. "You want to go back?" "I want what's mine," Bat said. But he was outvoted. The group packed up and moved out, heading north for Dodge under a sky as pale and bitter as Bat's mood. He bowed to the group, but he didn't forget. Not the sting of humiliation, not the sight of his own iron in another man's hands. He waited, watched, planned. And on Christmas night, with the wind howling low through the coulees, Bat and Jim Harvey rode out again, this time not to hunt buffalo, but to make a statement. They followed the old game trails to the edge of Bear Shield's encampment. The moonlight was cold and sharp, carving the land in the shades of blue and silver. They moved silently, wrapped in wool and snow dust. Every hoofbeat muffled. They struck fast. Bat and Harvey drove into the camp like ghosts, scattering ponies and raising chaos. Before the warriors could rouse or respond, the pair had turned the herd, over 150 head of horses, and pushed them south into the frozen dark. For 2 days, they rode hard, driving the stolen herd back toward Dodge through snow, sleet, and silence. Somewhere behind them, the Cheyenne were coming, but fate, perhaps amused, intervened. A snowstorm rolled in like a curtain from the west, erasing their trail, cloaking the land in white. When the warriors reached the edge of the storm, the path was gone. Bat and Harvey and their spoils had vanished. In Dodge, the horses sold for $1,200, a small fortune in hard times. Bat told the tale for years afterward, sometimes with a crooked grin, sometimes with a quiet pause. But he always ended the same way. "They cracked my skull, so I took their horses." It was more than revenge. It was principle. A lesson carved into the heart of a young plainsman who would one day wear the star, Sometimes survival meant leaving, but justice, real justice, meant coming back. In March of 1874, an expedition rolled out of Dodge, a dusty caravan of 30 freight-laden wagons and 50 men brimming with ambition, grit, and the stubborn hunger that made plainsmen what they were. At just 20 years old, Bat Masterson was the youngest among them. But 3 years on the frontier had carved the softness from his face and hammered steel into his resolve. He wasn't a boy anymore. He was a hunter, a fighter, a man about to walk into history. They crossed the Cimarron and pushed deep into the Texas Panhandle, following the winding course of West Adobe Walls Creek until they reached the ruins of an old trading post, Adobe Walls. Long abandoned and windblown, the place still whispered stories of Kit Carson and bloody clashes with the Comanche 10 years prior. There they made camp. Sod buildings rose one after another, a store here, a saloon there. Rath and Wright's hide warehouse, a blacksmith shop, even a restaurant run by Bill Olds and his wife. Within weeks, a little frontier village stood where only grass and ghosts had been. They waited for the buffalo to come. By May, the settlement was humming with life. Hunters came and went. Wagons rumbled in from Dodge. Rifles cracked during shooting matches behind Hanrahan's saloon, where whiskey flowed and the hide bar grew slick from drinking deals. Bat shined in these matches. He was quick with a 6-gun, yes, but with a Sharps rifle, he was surgical. He could drop a buffalo at 500 yards and barely blink. And when the great herds finally came, rumbling over the horizon like living thunder, he and the others saddled up and got to work. But the blood of buffalo would soon be joined by something far darker. In June, riders came in with bad news. Hunters were being found scalped, mutilated, butchered across the prairie. The Indian raids were no longer isolated incidents. They were coordinated strikes, spread out and ferocious. The Southern Plains tribes were rising, and their fury was focused on one target: the white invaders cutting through their hunting grounds. Some men packed up and fled for Dodge. Others stayed. On June 26, 1874, 28 men and 1 woman remained at Adobe Walls. Among them, Jim Hanrahan, Billy Dixon, and Bat Masterson. They were gamblers in the truest sense, risking everything for one more day in the buffalo trade. That night, just after 2 in the morning, a sudden noise rang out inside Hanrahan's saloon, a sharp, hollow crack that echoed through the building like the snap of a breaking beam. "The ridgepole's giving way!" Hanrahan shouted, his voice urgent and loud enough to rouse even the heaviest sleeper. The men jolted from their bedrolls. Without hesitation, they scrambled onto the roof and into the rafters, tossing dirt off the sod, hauling in timbers, propping up the ceiling with whatever they could find. They worked quickly, half-dressed and half awake, muttering curses into the darkness. But as dawn crept over the plains, and the ridgepole remained firm and unbroken, it became clear nothing had cracked. The structure was sound. The warning had been false. Or had it? Some men began to suspect that the sound hadn't been structural at all, but deliberate. A ruse. Rumors spread that Hanrahan had received word quietly and privately that an Indian attack was imminent, perhaps by courier or scout. But he'd known that if he warned the others outright, many would panic and flee, abandoning the post and their hard-earned investment in the camp. So the theory went: Hanrahan staged the entire incident. He invented the broken ridgepole, possibly even fired a gun outside to make the sound convincing. The goal? To get every man up, dressed and ready before sunrise, without revealing the real reason why. Some believed Billy Dixon had been in on it. Others whispered that Bat had helped hatch the plan, his mind already working like the lawman he would one day become. But no one ever confirmed it. What is known is this: that strange crack in the night got the men on their feet just before the sun rose. And just as that morning light spilled across the prairie, a wall of mounted warriors appeared on the horizon, charging straight for Adobe Walls. Call it trickery, call it foresight, call it fate. Whatever it was, that phantom sound in the night very likely saved every man's life. Just after dawn, a war whoop shattered the morning silence. The men looked east, toward the sun, and saw hell riding straight for them. Suddenly, the morning plains erupted with thunder. Not from the sky, but from the ground itself. Hundreds of mounted warriors surged over the horizon in a sweeping line, their ponies galloping at full speed, their war cries splitting the cool dawn air. The rising sun caught the glint of rifles, tomahawks, and lances as they charged, a living wave of fury and fire. Their faces were painted in vivid streaks of red, black, and yellow. Feathers and beads streamed from their hair. Their bodies moved in perfect rhythm with their mounts. It was the combined might of the southern plains tribes, Comanches, Kiowas, Cheyennes, and Arapahoes, riding as one. Under the leadership of Quanah Parker, they had come not just to raid, but to wipe Adobe Walls off the map. They meant to kill every last white man in the Texas Panhandle. At the first sound of hoofbeats, the hunters sprang into action. Men dove for cover, scrambling for rifles and revolvers. Bat Masterson, Billy Dixon, and the rest of the defenders sprinted for the three main buildings: Hanrahan's Saloon, Myers and Leonard's store, and Rath and Wright's warehouse. Doors slammed shut. Windows were blocked with sacks of flour, slabs of meat, and crates of supplies. The sod buildings, thick-walled and low-slung, became instant fortresses. Then came the first volley. Bullets hammered into the sod. Arrows clattered against the rooftops. Rifle butts smashed against doors as warriors flung themselves at the walls, expecting to overwhelm the defenders in a single charge. But they were met with something they hadn't expected. From the portholes, small slits carved into the earthen walls, came thunder. The Sharps rifles roared with a deep, gut-punching crack, each shot fired by seasoned buffalo hunters whose aim had been honed over countless kills. They were men who could hit a bison on the run at 300 yards, and now they were firing at targets no more than 30 feet away. The result was devastating. With each blast, a warrior dropped from the saddle, limbs flying, blood soaking into the prairie grass. Horses screamed and spun in confusion, trampling the fallen. The line wavered. Riders veered off course or crashed headlong into one another. But still they came. The battle became a blur of noise and dust. Hooves pounding, guns barking, men shouting commands over the roar. The air inside the buildings grew thick with black powder smoke and the raw stench of sweat and blood. Outside, amid the chaos, two men, the Shadler brothers, never made it to safety. They had been asleep in their wagons when the attack hit. By the time the others realized, it was too late. The brothers were killed where they lay, scalped and left as the first casualties of the day. But inside the sod walls, not a single defender had been hit. Bat Masterson worked his Sharps rifle with steady, deadly rhythm. Every movement, loading, aiming, firing, was smooth and practiced. There was no panic in his eyes, only focus. He wasn't fighting for glory or pay. He was fighting to live. Beside him, Billy Dixon fired with equal precision, his jaw clenched, his breath measured. Around them, a dozen other hunters kept up the hail of gunfire, holding back what should have been an unstoppable force. The warriors had come expecting an easy slaughter. Instead, they found a wall of lead. And as they pulled back to regroup, they left behind a battlefield strewn with the fallen, a grim warning that the defenders of Adobe Walls would not die easy. At one point, a young warrior dressed in a brilliant war bonnet galloped full speed alone toward the wall, straight into the teeth of the guns. He leapt from his horse and shoved a revolver through the porthole, firing blindly into the saloon. The room filled with smoke. No one was hit. As he turned to flee, he was shot off his horse, rose, and was struck again. Crawling now, bleeding and broken, he drew another pistol, placed it to his temple, and ended his own life. Bat later said, "I have never seen a bolder deed." The young man was Stone Teeth, the son of the Cheyenne chief Stone Calf. As the battle raged, news came that Billy Tyler had been hit, shot in the lungs, just 15 feet from the wall. He was moaning for water. Bat didn't hesitate. He made for the Myers store, bullets snapping past. There, he grabbed a bucket and turned toward the well. The well sat exposed, in full view of the enemy. It was suicide. But Bat was ready. Old Bill Keeler, grizzled and known to the tribes, insisted on going in Bat's place. He ran through the open yard with his dog at his heels. Bullets kicked up dirt. The dog was hit and fell dead. But Keeler made it to the well, filled the pail, and sprinted back untouched. The water did little good. Tyler died shortly after. Throughout the day, the defenders of Adobe Walls were harassed, not just by war cries and rifle fire, but by something far more unnerving: the sound of a bugle. From somewhere out on the bluff, clear and piercing calls rang out across the battlefield, military-style signals that preceded each new wave of attacks. To the hunters inside the sod buildings, the sound was maddening. It was foreign, out of place, almost surreal. The warriors had been organized before, but this was something new. The calls were precise, coordinated, evidence that someone among the attacking force had military training. Then, late in the afternoon, one of the hunters spotted movement near the Shadler wagon. A lone figure dashed from the wreckage, a bugle slung across his shoulder. It wasn't an Indian. It was a black man, likely an army deserter, who had thrown in with the tribes and was now using his old training against his former comrades. In that moment, the mystery was solved. This was the man who had been issuing the calls. This was the bugler. Some accounts credit Bat Masterson with firing the shot that brought him down. But Bat himself later said it was Harry Armitage who pulled the trigger, dropping the man with a single, clean .50 caliber shot from a Sharps rifle as he tried to run. Either way, the result was the same. The bugle calls stopped, and with them, the strange, eerie rhythm of the day's battle went silent. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the gunfire faded, and a heavy silence settled over Adobe Walls. The warriors melted back into the darkness, their war cries replaced by an eerie stillness. The siege had begun. Inside the sod buildings, the defenders sat in exhausted silence, nerves frayed, rifles cradled in tired arms. The air was thick with the stench of blood and gunpowder. Outside, horses lay rotting in the summer heat. Their carcasses swarmed by flies. Blood had soaked into the dry sod, and no one could sleep. Every creak of timber, every gust of wind set men reaching for their rifles. They knew the Indians would be back. But sometime the next day, a faint dust cloud appeared on the horizon. Then came the sound of wagon wheels, the kind of sound that might mean salvation or another fight. It was Bellfield's outfit, a pair of teams hauling hides from a camp down the valley. They'd seen no sign of trouble. Only later, hearing what had unfolded, did they understand how close they'd come to riding into a massacre. Word spread like prairie fire. Other camps sent men to reinforce the battered outpost. Riders came in ones and twos, some drawn by the smell of gunpowder, others by loyalty or vengeance. By the 6th day of the siege, over 100 hunters had gathered at Adobe Walls. Battle-hardened men with long guns, quick tempers, and nothing to lose. After days of siege and the constant threat of death, tempers ran raw. The once spacious outpost was now crammed with over 100 men, hunters, traders, freighters, all packed into 3 low-sod buildings. Sleep was scarce. The smell of blood clung to everything. Nerves were stretched thin, and the smallest spark could ignite a fight. That spark came one evening over a rifle. Bat Masterson had been using a Sharp's buffalo gun, a long-range rifle that had belonged to Bill Olds, the trader killed accidentally just days before. Bat preferred it to his own, appreciating its range and accuracy. But Bill's widow, Hannah Olds, was worried. With rumors of another scouting party heading out, she feared she'd never see the gun, or perhaps Bat again. She sent a note, politely but firmly requesting its return. Fred Leonard and Frank Brown were the messengers. They found Bat leaning on the bar in Hanrahan's saloon, relaxed in posture, but watchful, always. Leonard handed over the note. Bat read it, then looked up slowly. "You go tend to your business," he said coolly. "I'll tend to mine." The tension jumped like a live wire. Frank Brown, not one to be talked down, pressed him. Words escalated, voices rose, then fists. Bat swung first. What followed was pure chaos. Men grabbed stools and broke them over each other's backs. Bottles shattered, furniture splintered. Someone crashed through a window, drawing cheers and curses from the onlookers. Pistols were drawn, pointed, cursed over, but miraculously not fired. The saloon, already a battered sanctuary from the war outside, was now under siege from its own defenders. The standoff lasted for hours. No one slept. Everyone picked sides. What began as a dispute over a gun nearly turned into a gunfight over pride. In the end, someone waved a white flag. Words were exchanged. Bat handed the rifle back the next morning, just as promised. On the 7th day, with the immediate danger past, a party was formed to return to Dodge, Bat among them. They rode quiet and grim. They reached Dodge on July 17th. The town turned out in force to meet them, faces eager for news, voices hungry for stories. Henry Lease had already spread word of the battle. Now, with the survivors returning, Dodge City roared to life. The buffalo hunt was over, for now. The saloons boomed, dice clattered, the dance halls overflowed. And Bat Masterson, blood still under his fingernails, let himself slip back into the revelry, drifting from the war-torn plains to the glittering chaos of Dodge. Bat didn't know what he would do next, but that was the way of the frontier. Fortune one day, fire the next. You didn't plan. You survived. And somewhere between bloodshed and bravado, you found your path. For Bat Masterson, that path was just beginning. The fight at Adobe Walls had forged something inside him. A quiet strength, a sharpened edge. He had faced the fury of hundreds and never flinched. And in the months and years to come, that steel would carry him through gunfights, lawman's work, and legend-making moments. But for now, the boy from the Kansas prairie had returned from war. He was no longer just a hunter. He was a survivor. He was Bat Masterson.
Bat Masterson left Dodge that July a little harder, a little wiser, and a whole lot more dangerous. He had seen death rise with the sun at Adobe Walls. He'd stood shoulder to shoulder with buffalo hunters while the horizon burned with war. He didn't flinch. He didn't fold. And though he didn't yet wear a badge, the men around him had started to look at him differently. They saw the resolve, the edge, the man who got things done. quietly, cleanly, and without apology. Bat had come to the plains chasing buffalo. But he was leaving with something more: a reputation, a code, and a fire that would carry him deeper into the heart of the West. Because out here, justice didn't come in a courtroom. It came on horseback, with a steady hand and eyes that didn't blink. And Bat Masterson was just getting started. At Chronicles of the Old West, we don't just retell frontier legends. We dig beneath the dust to find the truth that made them. What you've heard today is drawn from real history: eyewitness accounts, period newspapers, private journals, and the rare traces Bat Masterson left behind in his own words. Then we do the hard work of turning those fragments into a living story, so you can hear the heartbeat of a time long gone. If this episode pulled you in, if it changed the way you see the West, or gave new life to a name you'd only glimpsed in passing, consider leaving a rating or review. Better yet, share it with someone who still believes history deserves to be felt, not just memorized. Because we're just getting started. The man in the bowler hat has a long trail ahead, and it won't all be gun smoke and glory. Subscribe now and saddle up for the next chapter of Steel and Silk, the life of Bat Masterson. Only here on Chronicles of the Old West.